Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the final track or the last track for today's. In this particular session, we are talking about the IoT ecosystem and how do we accommodate security in the IoT ecosystem. We are talking about the research and the innovation possibilities, and it's my privilege to present an eminent panel. Although it's a panel, we'll be doing short presentations from each of the experts. So let me welcome my first expert on the stage, Mr. Sunil David. Mr. Sunil is the regional director of IoT for AT&T. Can we have Mr. Sunil on stage, please? Welcome, Mr. Sunil, on the stage.
Thank you.
My second expert for the day would be Mr. Mike Nelson, Vice President of IoT Security for DigiCert. Can we have Mike on stage, please? Welcome, Mike. And last but not the least, we have Miss Amrita Bhanja. Amrita is automotive security tester from eScript and comes from the automotive IoT security background. Can we have Amrita on stage, please? Yes, welcome, Amrita. So, Mr. Sunil, can we start with you? Can we have the first presentation from you on this in this important topic of IoT security? And would request Zadu team to take me backstage.
Sure. Thank you, Aditya. Good afternoon and good evening to everyone. I'm Sunil David. I'm the regional director from AT&T responsible for the IoT business. I hope you all can see my screen. Yes.
I can see it. Looking good, Sunil.
Okay. Thank you. Um, uh, Let me first share some very important data points with you all. And this is something which I just got this morning, and I just wanted to kind of emphasize the importance of IoT security and why this is so relevant in today's context. So there was this study which was done by Atlas VPN, and they estimate that the average business cost of an IoT security breach today is 4.2 million. 4.2 million. And there was another research done by Zscaler, well known in the cloud security space, and when they did a survey, they found that the percentage of IoT communications today which are not secure is 76%, a staggering 76%. So, friends, there's a lot that needs to be done when it comes to securing IoT devices, network, and applications. And when you talk about IoT, what is really needed is a very holistic approach when it comes to IoT. You got to have end-to-end security for IoT. And what we would recommend is to have a multi-layered approach to help protect the IoT ecosystem end to end. So on the left side, you have endpoints which vary in processing power capability. You have the connectivity, which is very, very important. Different forms of connectivity are there: cellular, satellite, Wi-Fi, and so on. And then, of course, all the data which is going to a cloud platform. You got to secure the data. You got to secure the applications, right? Now, just looking at the endpoint, and as I mentioned, they vary based on the type, the processing power. If you just look at the previous generation of endpoints, the older versions, there were probably not many with operating systems, very little processing power, very limited functionality, specifically designed for certain purposes. But what we are seeing today is that the devices, the IoT devices with the sensors in it, with the network module in it, with the processing, the storage, the IoT device is having operating systems. You can choose whatever operating system that you want to. Lot more processing power in it, lot more functionality. You can do bi-directional communication. Very, very capable devices, right? So I think what is really needed is to secure the IoT device end to end. What is really needed is to devise both the software as well as a hardware strategy when it comes to securing an endpoint, right? Because the IoT device is the weakest link in the chain. If you're able to compromise the IoT device, then you can really get into the network and create havoc. And there are methods by which you can do it. For example, you can have SIM-based identity and access management. Many of these IoT devices have SIMs inside. If you're using cellular network, one option could be to use encrypted SIMs so the data is encrypted. Other option could be embedded SIM so that the SIM is embedded on the motherboard or the PCB. So you can do all that. And in terms of how do you change firmware, You can do a firmware over the air, software over the air update, right? And then you can also implement endpoint security like anti-malware, web filtering, firewalls, and so on, right? So I think it's very, very, very important to protect the IoT endpoint. And I'm going to talk about the importance of certification as we progress. Now, it's just not about building that IoT device, securing it for both from a software and a hardware perspective. What is also really needed is to have the device certified and by bodies that do that certification, right? And there are different categories by which you can actually secure the device. And I just want to illustrate first category one, where you can have very basic security safeguards. So many of these IoT devices come with default passwords. So the least one can do is to change the default password. You can also do something like authentication tests, connecting the device to the network and bidirectional authentication both ways. You can have access controls implemented and, of course, patch management and software updates. So these are very basic security safeguards one could have. Then one can go to the next level, and here you can build a lot more end-to-end security. So, for example, you can, the audit log can be protected, the data which is in transit can be encrypted. You can also implement multi-factor authentication. I think it's extremely important to do that. Two-factor authentication is perhaps the way to go. You can remotely deactivate the device if there is if the device is compromised, then you can definitely do that. You can do a secure boot so that you can make sure that it is booting from the authentic operating system which is there on that. You can also do monitoring of the threats and device identity. So that is very, very important. Every device can come with a specific identity. So identity access and management becomes very critical. And the final category is that you could have encryption of data at rest. You can do a digital signature generation, tamper evidence, build certain design and features. So these are the three different categories of security certification that one can do. Now, having talked about the device and the need to make sure that the device is certified, let me very briefly talk about the need to secure the network. Now, as I mentioned, there are multiple options for connectivity, right? You could use cellular. Cellular is by far the most secure because it has gone through, many years of standardization. Today, use 3GPP standards for cellular networks. So you could secure the network from the data which is coming from the physical asset as it's going to the cloud. You could use a VPN network through a tunnel. You could have private APNs, private access point names. You could also have certain features from the connectivity management platform that manages that, and I'll come to that a little later. But there are different ways by which one can secure the network through which you are sending all the data. Now, you could use a connectivity management platform to secure IoT devices. And I just wanted to emphasize the importance of a connectivity management platform because you really needed to manage, the device estate, the network. Imagine if you have a scale of thousands of devices on the field, you got to manage the connectivity, hundreds of SIMs that you need to manage. So the platform plays a very, very important role. And what you could also do is leverage some of the capabilities that the platform brings, some of the security features, things like you could have private IP pools. You could also have non-routable IPs. You could have IP blacklists, whitelists. You could also have two-factor authentication to access the portal, right? So the platform brings in a lot of these capabilities, right? So if you are able to combine device security with the features that the network offers from a security standpoint, and then you add the features which the platform provides, that will make sure that you really build a very robust security infrastructure. I just want to conclude by saying that you got to have IoT security along with IT security. You cannot have a separate policy for IoT security and a separate policy for IT security. You've got to have one single consistent policy for both the OT environments, the operational technology environments on which you connect the IoT devices, and of course the IT security. And of course, this has to be on the boardroom agenda. You got to have a defense in depth, multi-layered approach. That's the way to go. And the last point which I wanted to highlight was the security by design principle for every layer. And we talk about from a device standpoint. A few years back, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which is one of our regulators here, they had come up with a guideline which says that every IoT device in India have to adopt the security by design principle. It's still a guideline. I'm hoping that at some point in time, this will be converted into a firm policy. And I think for the onus is on the manufacturers to make sure that they build these kind of security by design principles in the device, so that builds a lot more confidence amongst their end customers. Because today, security is one of the biggest barriers when it comes to IoT adoption. And if you're able to assure your customers that you're adhering to all these principles, that will build a lot more confidence amongst their customers. And I just wanted to leave you with the final thought that security is a business problem. It is not a technology problem. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Great job. I think I'm up. Sunil, you're speaking my love language there. I was going to say, those of us who live in the IoT security space, I think the points that you made are so good, and organizations would be so wise to follow that guidance. And I agree with you that it really is it's a business problem. It's not a technology problem. The technology is available to be able to solve the challenges and the problems that you're talking about, but oftentimes organizations struggle to get approval to do the right things. And we're starting to see some maturing in that, but we still have a ways to go. IoT security is challenging. If it wasn't, we probably wouldn't be talking about it today on this stage, and really appreciate the conference for taking time to talk about what I think is such an important and a growing challenge. I'm going to talk about some of the same things that Sunil did. I would just emphasize, I think, he covered, I loved his layered approach for security, holistic approach, the mindset. All of those are so good and so important to do. People ask me all the time why IoT security is so hard, and I use this as my answer a lot, which is the IoT is complex. Connected devices are popping up in every corner of our lives. And with that, they're presenting a lot of different challenges. But the reason I find it so challenging is because of the complexity. And I'm going to just talk through and highlight some of these. When an organization is trying to do a comprehensive approach, it's very important to address some of these complexities that I'm going to mention that I believe add to the challenge. The first one is the environment. As I said, we're seeing these devices pop up in every corner of our lives, businesses, our homes, on the road. We're seeing, DigiCert, we have certificates on IoT devices in satellites that are floating in space, and we also have them on submarines at the bottom of the ocean, and we have them everywhere in between. All of those are different types of environments that have constraints and challenges. A hospital is very different from a smart home. A sensor in a field on a farm is very different from a vehicle going down the road at 70 miles an hour. The environments and the complexities that each of those environments presents need to be thought about when planning for security. The next challenge is around connectivity. IoT devices are all about connectivity and generating and transmitting data, but they connect, and they connect in different ways. Some use Bluetooth, some use Wi-Fi, cellular, 5G, near field communication. All of those connectivity protocols are good, but each of them have their strengths and their weaknesses, and you need to think about and do the right thing based on how the device is communicating. Sunil mentioned computation power. That's a very important component of security. I mentioned a sensor in a field, or you think about a cardiac device that is embedded within a patient. Some IoT devices have very limited power and ability to do robust computation. And security, sometimes certain security approaches require that. And so the power of the device, what its capabilities are, needs to be part of the planning. The next is about operating systems. I would say 10 years ago with connected devices, it was much more of a wild, wild west. We saw a lot of homegrown operating systems that were being used on IoT devices that, the variation in their security capabilities was hard to predict, and it was hard to plan for. And security teams that were, it was a challenge. We're starting to see more standardization around some of the operating systems that are being used, but there's still a wide degree of variation. And each of those operating systems have their strengths and their weaknesses around security. As a security professional planning to secure those devices, you need to understand the capabilities of those operating systems and put in place the right controls to ensure that those operating systems are being used in a way that is secure. The next complexity is hardware. Um, we always encourage manufacturers to use tamper-resistant memory. Um, there are a lot of devices out there in the wild that are not using this. And so there's a lot of variation again in the hardware and the capability of those of the hardware being used. And so make sure that as you're planning for security, you consider the hardware impact. And finally, battery life. Security requires computation. Computation takes battery. And so thinking about a device that needs to have a battery shelf life of 20 years because it's embedded within a patient and it requires a surgical procedure to remove it, that's a very different security challenge based on battery than a device that is connected to a power source. And you don't have to worry about that. And so thinking about the constraints of the device from a comp power, but also from a battery shelf life is very important. IoT devices, I say this all the time, have three common vulnerabilities: authentication, encryption, and integrity. These devices are connecting to things. Anything that connects requires appropriate authentication, and Sunil did a good job of talking about that. But it's users, it's backend connections, it's gateways, it's device to device, it's device to any type of server. You need to mutually authenticate all connections. IoT is about the data. I wrote a blog recently about the fastest way for the IoT to fail is to lose the integrity of the data that it generates. And so using digital signatures to ensure the integrity of data, encrypting the data as it's in transit and at rest is so important to ensure the long-term success. And then finally, integrity. IoT devices are all about update. Sunil talked about firmware or over the network, over the air, over the network updates. It's important to ensure the integrity of those packets to make sure that malware is not being embedded and that malicious activity is not part of those updates. And so using things like digital signatures to ensure the integrity, not just of updates, but also configuration files, things like secure boot, to make sure that the devices are operating in an intended state. So in closing, I'll just share with you my list of fundamentals. Sunil did the same. The first thing is really to understand and mitigate your risk. Look at the complexities that I've spoken, that I talked about, plan for those complexities, understand the risks, and mitigate them appropriately with the right controls. Never trust unauthenticated connections. Never run unsigned code. Never allow your device to accept an update and execute it without it having a digital signature that's trusted. Never trust unsigned data. Encrypt sensitive data at rest and in transit. And then finally, maintain control. I talk to CISOs all the time who say their biggest worry is the unknown. DigiCert, we play in the public key infrastructure certificate space. When you have certificates that are unknown and unmanaged, that is a massive risk for an organization. It doesn't allow you to see when validity periods expire. It doesn't give you the ability to revoke certificates that have been compromised. Having control of your security protections is so important to ensure that you're doing things the right way. I'll close with that and kick it over and back to the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. I really loved it. It's just so great to have three people here who talk the same language, who are basically sending out the same message. So I just feel like maybe I don't need to present. But yeah, what I'm going to talk today about is automotive cybersecurity. As I saw in some of the pictures in the slide shared, vehicles today are IoT devices. So if you guys can see my screen, I'll just proceed.
Looks good.
That's great. Okay, so we'll see the unpleasant truths of automotive cybersecurity. So we know that digitalization has increased. The number of what began as a single ECU back in 1980 is a full-blown in-vehicle connection today. It is not just communicating inside; it is also communicating to the infrastructure outside. There are luxury cars today in the world there with more than 100 electronic control units or ECUs connected within. But as the complexity increases, the connectivity increases, the number of vulnerabilities or number of attack surfaces on the car increases both internally as well as externally. So cars have more external communication to customer devices today. They can talk to cell phones, they can talk to the internet, to cloud services. They will be communicating with other cars and road infrastructure. As the connectivity increases, there are more attack surfaces, and security is a concern throughout all the stages of vehicle development, including planning when it is just on papers, design, implementation, manufacturing, and back-end enterprise IT. There are numerous threats in the connective features and cloud services supporting vehicles. Attacks can include command injection, data corruption, backdoors to function, or attack leading to eavesdropping on communication and data leakage. Vehicle can also be affected by malware and ransomware, just like any other industry today. Like all the big hacks that happened because of ransomware in the recent past few years, that can happen to a vehicle manufacturing or to a vehicle itself. Um, I would now like to show you guys a video, which is a famous attack, which was a research kind of attack published on Wired magazine in 2015. It's the Charlie Miller and Jeep attack, the Jeep Cherokee. So, is it possible for the platform to um, share the video?
On the dashboard. But as I drove down the interstate, things started getting unpleasant and very loud. Perfect. I can't turn it down.
This was such a fun video. See, look, I got to enjoy
And now
it.
the air conditioning is blasting, the music is blasting, and I can't see anything because of the windshield wiper fluid. I gotta do it. Do it. Kill the engine.
So we're killing the engine right now.
Actually, can't accelerate. I stomped on the gas, but the Jeep slowed to a crawl. It says 40 miles an hour, but I'm not doing that. I turned on my hazard lights, but I was still stuck in the right lane with no shoulder to escape onto. Guys, I'm stuck on the highway. He's not gonna be able to hear us with that radio.
Okay, I think we can pause the video now.
Guys, I need the accelerator to work again. The accelerator will work. It won't work. It won't work. Seriously, it's dangerous. I need to move. You gotta turn the car off. Now you should be good to go.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, team, for sharing the video. So as we see, it is one of the famous car attacks. Good thing was it was a research, but nevertheless, it costed the company a lot of money to do recalls. The attack that you saw, let me just go back to sharing my screen. So the attack that you saw was because of a vulnerability that was found on the infotainment unit. The infotainment unit had a way so that they could use it and remotely connect from the car from outside, as you saw them sitting on their couch, and then carrying out this attack remotely. And imagine if this could happen in a large scale. Well, I mean, it's a very scary thought. So um, let me talk about some of the unpleasant truths now. Then, um, so security and safety are often used interchangeably. An analogy that I found helpful to understand is to see that security is like an umbrella in a storm, and that protects you from the rain. The key factor is that do not stay dry from, do not get into the rain. So safety is like staying dry. Without security, you cannot have safety. If security is not guaranteed, it can be a matter of life and death because you don't know what a security hack could do to a car. It is assumed that by 2023, 775 million vehicles will be connected. So the number of safety critical systems that are online is increasing. So, as my partners here on this panel shared, that security must be a part of the original equipment of every vehicle so that driver is optimally protected. It is important that the automobile manufacturers understand cybersecurity as an elementary part of product security development and create a sense of responsibility along the core activities and all the value action. So these are some of the points that I talk about. It could lead to high number of deaths and there could be potential accidents. Now let's look at how did the Jeep 2015 attack that you just saw a video of affected Fiat Chrysler Automobiles FCA. They had to carry out a safety recall for 1.4 million vehicles in the United States after the safety researchers showed this attack. The magazine Wired reported it in July that hackers had taken over Jeep Cherokee by the Internet Connected Entertainment System. Um, as a result, Jeep had to recall 1.4 million. But the surprising thing is that it could be any OEM, it could be any vehicle. It didn't necessarily have to be Jeep. It was just Jeep by coincidence. But can you imagine the financial loss, the communication disaster that happened over it? Um, the increasing number of connected vehicles and growing number of security critical systems that are online will increase the potential attack vectors and as a result will dramatically increase the number of cybersecurity incidents. So it is sooner or later every OEM will be affected if they don't implement security in the design of the vehicle. The other important thing to look at is the legislations around cybersecurity. As we know today, since the last few years, a lot of legislations are coming into picture. Some of the important ones, as you see here, are the UNECE WP29 that came out last year, and the ISO 21434 that also came out last year. The ISO 21434 is applicable in the United States currently. The UNECE is applicable globally, but the European Union has adopted it as of now, and they want to make sure that every automotive manufacturer gets a audit for their new vehicle type release from mid of next year. So no vehicle should be on road if it hasn't been audited for cybersecurity. What kind of audit this is? This is mostly organizational level audit to ensure that security is in the design uh, of the car development process. So compliance with UNECE will become mandatory for type of approval, as I said. So security today is not just an interest of the OEM, but also an interest of different nations. I think what's important is if we have some regulators or some people who are listening to this right now, is India adopts some method or regulations for cybersecurity itself. It would be a slow development process, but it will be really great to see the world moving in that direction where we are talking about security on our organization on a vehicle level, IoT, manufacturing, everything combined. um, some of the security activities that could be taken up are as I said, cybersecurity management at a organization level as well as at a project level. Risk assessments are important part of risk management, like we saw in the previous two slides. We should have a systematic approach to measure and mitigate vehicle risk to acceptable level. Product development should include a cybersecurity concept and plans for post development activities such as penetration tests, fuzz tests. I think all of this is really important. And also, the other part of the life cycle of the vehicle, that is vulnerability management, cybersecurity monitoring, incident response. Um, so I think I would like to end my talk here. I hope you guys had learned a little about vehicle cybersecurity from the slides today. And yeah, I will um, let the platform team take the stage if they want to.
Hi, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So those were some really intriguing presentations, Mike, Amrita, and Mr. Sunil. So I would like to start with you, Amrita. Just one question. Very fascinating videos indeed, because automotive security and automotive IoT security, the work that is going into it, whether it's in terms of the standards that are getting developed, whether it is the government regulatory interventions or the interventions from the policymakers, or whether it's in terms of the cybersecurity controls, that are getting introduced. So this is one of the questions which I had from my colleague who follows automotive sector a little more closely. So he says that post 5 to 10 years we are expecting level 5 autonomous vehicles to come into the picture, right? And once the level 5 autonomous vehicles have hit the road and are very much part of the ecosystem, so how do you think the cybersecurity controls for those level 5 autonomous vehicles might change from from what we are analyzing or looking at today? So any comments around it? Any quick inputs from you?
So I think today we focus a lot on in-vehicle cybersecurity, talking about
Right.
gateway modules and how they're communicating, the different modules are communicating with each other and securing that communication. I think as we move on top of each other on the levels on autonomous vehicles, level 5 going to probably the OEMs today or the suppliers today would be super comfortable with in-vehicle cybersecurity, and somehow I assume or hope that we have mastered it, and then we start focusing a lot more on external vehicle communication. I think external vehicle communication is still, of course, considered today, but the interfaces will be even a lot more when we reach a level 5 secure, level 5 autonomous vehicle type.
Right. Right.
Yeah, a quick comment on that, if I may. It's a good
Sure.
question. And there's so much going on in the vehicle space. Vehicles are moving to electric, and there's a whole security posture with charging stations, and we're doing DigiCert's doing some interesting work with SAE on that, and there's a lot of maturity that needs to happen there. In the autonomous space, it really comes down to how you do autonomy. And, I think you have some OEMs and organizations like Tesla where they say, look, we're not going to rely on a vehicle to vehicle connectivity. We're just going to rely on sensor data, we're mapping data, things like that. And we're going to do autonomous that way. I think that's a quicker path to success than the challenge of V2V. Although I think it's such an important and it adds more security and safety, I would say, but it's very hard. It's hard to go from where we are today to complete V2V connectivity where vehicles are interacting with all other vehicles, within a certain perimeter. And so, it'll be really interesting in the coming years to see how that plays out. I typically think the sensor is going to, I should be careful in saying that, but I do think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And based on that, it will require unique security approaches. If you're doing sensor based, it's about securing, and ensuring integrity with mapping, with the sensors, with your response to those. If it's V2V, it's a massive security challenge that requires a lot of infrastructure. It requires a lot of processing power to do that in a way where you have such rapid response at such a high level.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Kind of not exactly a related question, but this is, to all the panelists. So, ransomware and malware has been a very, very important theme for, this edition of Annual Information Summit. And in fact, we started our conference by talking that how ransomware has assumed the proportions of a pandemic. So we are calling it a ransomware pandemic, right? So when it comes to the IoT ecosystem, so how do you see the ransomware and the malware attacks specifically in the context of IoT ecosystem? Just wanted your, quick comments from each one of you, rather. We can have, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, Mike,
I was going to ask if Sunil wanted to start since we've already.
That's okay.
Answered.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say I think WannaCry was a great example of a ransomware attack that impacted IoT. The WannaCry ransomware virus spread rapidly through the health services in the UK, and it was the first time that patients were not able to receive care based on a cyber attack because systems were just down. IoT devices that were in hospitals were taken offline because they were not able to be used, and databases were encrypted. And so it is a pandemic of epic proportions right now. Ransomware is everywhere, and devices that have connectivity and have operating systems that can be attacked are vulnerable to those types of attacks. And when your business is reliant on those systems, it just emphasizes the importance of doing the right things from security to prevent those things from happening.
Yep. Mr. Suri?
Yeah, I just want to 2 quick points, Aditya. I think we must never forget the human factor here, because a lot of the breaches happen because of very poor security hygiene followed by people, right? So I think what is needed is a lot more awareness among people, because that's a very important factor. And I think the next important thing which I wanted to highlight is that get your fundamentals right. Simple things like many times, as I said, IoT devices people don't change their passwords. So get your fundamentals right. Access controls. Get all your fundamentals right. Make sure that proper security hygiene is followed, and don't ever forget the people aspect of it. I think if you're able to combine all this together, then I'm sure you can, manage risk. I won't say you can avoid risk, but you can manage risk better, Aditya, in my view.
Got it. Amrita, any
So,
views here?
yeah, of course. I mean, I think in the automotive sector, I think when I started out 6 years back working with Script and talking to manufacturing plants of different OEMs or even suppliers, they would keep their systems within the plant offline. I think because they really wanted to avoid, but how long can you be offline? You need key injection, you need backend connectivity for certificate injections into different electronic control units within the car or on the car, different modules. So they are opening up. I think the reluctance is pretty evident. They don't even want to update. I don't know. Probably Windows update is very controlled, or even whatever operating system they are using. And I think keeping them offline was the way they thought they could avoid all the problems. But it's not anymore, because in automotive, manufacturing is money. Uh, oh, if the if the line stops where the manufacturing occurs, the money stops. So I believe the ransomware attack, as we heard from the other two panelists, could affect the IoT, likewise the automotive industry a lot, because if cars stop manufacturing, the companies stop making money, they stop investing in autonomous cars. So I think, yeah, we should always be on a watch out. And as Mr. Sunil said, it is the human factor following security hygiene. So I think that's important in every aspect today.
Right. So, the last few minutes of the session, I actually wanted to spend on a phrase that we have actually
Yeah,
put in
Aditya, I just
the.
want to make
Sure,
I
sure,
just
sure.
want to make one very quick point. I think what is important, Aditya, is we need to get all the ecosystem to come together. I think we got to get the device manufacturer, the telecom providers, the industry associations, all of them have to, government agencies. I think we need all of them, bodies like NASCOM. I think we got to get all of them coming together, sharing best practices. I think this has to be tackled at that level, because if the
Absolutely.
cybersecurity is not the core competency of any organization, you got to work with other players in the ecosystem to see how we can manage
Absolutely.
risk better, in my view.
Absolutely. Can't agree with you more. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, no, thanks for that, additional remark, Mr. Sunil. That holds, that's very pertinent, especially for bodies like DSCI, who actually have the, kind of the charter of bringing those stakeholders from different domains together and possibly deliberate on such things. But what I was saying was that we have a few minutes left for the session. What I wanted to focus on, the words that we have put in the byline of the session. If you look at, we're talking about constrained resources, research, and innovation possibilities, right? And we do understand that IoT in itself is a constrained environment, where the resources are constrained. So, if I can come to Mike on this, because for constrained environment, it is recommended to have lightweight cryptography algorithms. That is recommended, and a lot of research and innovation is going on that front. So where do you see the need for probably stepping up the research on that part? And is enough being done in coming up with innovative lightweight cryptography algorithms, and possibly the support that is required in order to develop those innovative and ingenious lightweight cryptographic algorithms for a constrained resource like an IoT?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we could spend an entire session unpacking that
Yeah.
question. Is enough being done? So I never think enough is being done. So I will answer it on that. But I will tell you that we are seeing good things. I mean, security and IoT. I talk about flexibility. The way you solve for I talk about complexity. The way you solve for complexity is having solutions that have flexibility. It's not by cutting your device off, like was said, or taking away its connectivity. It's by having solutions that can scale up or can scale down. Symmetric keys, asymmetric keys, different encryption algorithms, RSA, ECC. Each of them have different profiles. Some of them have heavier computation, and some are lighter weight. And having the resources to be able to look at each deployment and say, what do we need for this one, is what is required. There's not a silver bullet that works for all IoT. You have to look at it through a unique lens. And I am encouraged by the solutions that we have. We have many partnerships that help us do things outside of standard X509 certificates. And that's important, because you need to be able to solve those challenges on devices that might not be able to support that. And so, I do think there's a lot of good solutions out there. We could spend a lot more time on that. If you have questions, I'm sure all of us would love to talk to any of the attendees about how we can help them with that. But just using a unique lens, because every device deployment is unique and requires a unique set of security controls.
Perfect, perfect. So my parting question to all the panelists, and of course, you have been an excellent, set of speakers. And my parting question to you would be on the standards front, because uh, Amrita did touch upon, standards being an important part of the overall ecosystem. But if you talk about IoT security standards, so Mr. Sunil, I'll come to you first from a telecom perspective. Are you seeing enough activity on the standards development front when it comes to IoT security, whether it's the standard making bodies or several consortiums that are coming together to build some robust standards for securing the IoT ecosystem? So, any comments, quick comments around the standard development space?
So it's an ongoing process right now, Aditya. So we are part of various consortiums working with other industry bodies, working with even companies like Nokia, Qualcomm, guys who make the processing chips. So we're part
Absolutely.
of a few consortiums. We're also in partnership with the Automobile Industry Association. So it's still work in progress, and that's a big challenge today. You don't have standardized security. So I think that's still work in progress. Very difficult to say whether enough is being done today or not. But I think that there's enough collaboration today happening between all the players, and I'm hoping that at some point in time, this is an issue that we won't be discussing next year or the year after next. But there's
Got
still
it.
work to be done.
Got it. Got it. Amrita, quick words, especially from an automotive standpoint, IoT security standards development work that's happening, or the work probably if you're keeping an eye on that particular space. So, any views from you?
Definitely, like I touched before, I think there have been a lot of movement in that field in the last few years, and it's still ongoing. Like such as I talked about ISO 21434. It is for the US, but it could be adopted. It's a ISO standard. It could be adopted by any country. They are also planning to have something like an audit, like the UN regulations have defined. I think if anyone is listening and they're interested, look up UNECE regulation 155 and 156. And I think it's important that we know more about it. We bring it into picture and play, and then make sure that everybody is on the same page when we are talking about security and organizational security.
Right. Mike, I can only allow you 30 seconds to respond because
Yeah,
unfortunately we're
I,
done out of
I
time.
can go real fast. I think there's two layers of it. There's the global IoT or industry IoT, and I think that countries and states need to continue to push for better practices around IoT security in general. The layer below that is at the vertical level. And as you see with with vehicles or with healthcare or with telco, where we see the most success is where industries come together, form collaborations, and come up with standards that they can agree on. ISO 15118, securing electric vehicles is a great example of that. Industries are behind on that, and I wish we could see more activity in that space at the vertical industry level.
No, I would have definitely loved, as Mike said, the lightweight cryptography space or the standard space, or for that matter, any aspects with, Amrita touched, Mr. Sunil touched upon, or even Mike covered so many aspects, especially from the complexity standpoint. I would have loved the discussion to go on, but thank you so much, everyone. We have come to the end of this particular critical session. Hope to see, remain in touch with you and possibly, connect offline with you as well. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.